I think people were always built this way, but more and more they are less willing to work in an organization where they don't feel and aren't recognized for the value they're adding. Everybody wants to contribute. Everybody wants to do some meaningful work. And while that's probably always been the case, people are, in a good way, are much more outspoken about it now. And so if I'm not a leader that recognizes that recognizes what we call the whole person paradigm, and value that person as a whole person and the contribution they want to make, then I'm going to have less than stellar talent in my organization.
Hello and welcome to FranklinCovey on Leadership. I'm your host, Will Hodeling. In this podcast, we meet with many of the world's leadership experts to learn the mistakes, mindsets, and methods that help them become the people they are today. We hope that their hard-earned insights will accelerate you on your journey. Today's episode is a special New Year's resolution edition of the podcast, where we'll speak with FranklinCovey thought leader Todd Davis. Todd Davis has been at FranklinCovey for 30 years and started by leading our innovations group and more recently served for many years as our chief people officer. In addition, Todd is also the author of 2 best-selling books, including the 2017 book, Get Better, about building great relationships at work. In today's conversation, we'll discuss the seminal leadership book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The 7 Habits was written by Dr. Stephen R. Covey, the co-founder of FranklinCovey, and we hope will serve as a foundation for your New Year's resolutions. In addition, we'll talk with Todd about his book, Get Better, as well as the leadership lessons that he's learned being on the front lines for the last 30 years. Todd Davis, welcome to FranklinCovey on Leadership.
Thanks, Will. Great to see you.
Wonderful. I'm excited for today's conversation. So this is our special New Year's resolution edition of the FranklinCovey on Leadership Conversations.
Okay.
And so many people right now, we're airing this a couple of days after the new year. Many people are still setting their intentions for the year. If you had to prescribe just one of the 7 habits as the ultimate New Year's resolution for leaders, what would you select and why?
Wow. Just one? Well, I would go right to habit 2, begin with the end in mind. The new year, I would look at my year. I do look at my year and say, where do I want to be a year from now, and then break it down 6 months from now, 2 months. So I would have that vision and those achievements in mind and really be specific about where I want to be a year from now.
You have obviously lived the 7 habits for decades, working at FranklinCovey and teaching the 7 habits and bringing the 7 habits to organizations. I would love to hear about your own 7 habits journey. What is a habit that you have spent a lot of time cultivating? Maybe it's one that you were naturally quite as good at and you've developed over the years.
Well, first of all, I don't want to correct you, but I want to correct you. When you say I have spent years living the 7 habits, I have spent years trying to live the 7 habits. It's an ongoing journey, have yet to perfect any of them. But to your question, gosh, I would say habit 3, putting first things first. I am a yes person. I'm a people pleaser. I'm not a yes person, but I'm a people pleaser. When I say yes person, I want to be that go-to person for people. And while that may be admirable and you have a lot of friends, you end up, at least I've learned, you end up doing a lot of things at a B plus or C level versus a few things at an A plus level. And so one that is a continuous battle for me and something I've improved on, but I still have to be very mindful of it, is deciding what are the most important things. There's always, many great ideas and many good things to choose from. It's not like choosing between a bad thing and a good thing, but it's really every week this discipline that I have of going through what is my primary focus going to be on this week. It's ongoing for me. Habit 3 is a challenge.
So maybe share more about those practices. Habit 3, put first things first, I think is a great one. It's such an important one to focus on. I think it's a good addition to, as you start to begin with the end in mind. I think the 2 of those often go hand in hand. So what are the practices that you put in place to ensure that you're putting first things first?
Yeah, great question. Well, weekly planning. It sounds so basic, and maybe it is basic, but to put it into practice. So every Sunday night, and people have different times when they choose to do that, but I did establish this habit a long time ago, and it has benefited me greatly. And the rare occasion, and I mean it's rare, like once every 3 or 4 months, I get home late on a Sunday night from something and too tired and think, oh, I'll just wait and do it tomorrow morning. And all of a sudden it's Wednesday or Thursday and I haven't done it yet. And so that discipline on a Sunday night of taking 20 or 30 minutes, looking at my week ahead, obviously a lot of things are already filled in there, but there are some open spaces and some times that I have choices or a place where I can make a choice to do things. And so that ritual and that habit has served me very well when I have a moment to focus and say, what is most important this week, and who are the most important people in my life, both professional and personal, and what's the most important thing I can do in that role this week. So that's a practice that I have tried to follow for many years now.
In answering there, you talked about rituals, and I think it's interesting, the FranklinCovey 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, the canonical leadership, self-development book, best-selling of all time. It really started this discussion around effective habits, and then that discussion has been built on over time. You have James Clear's Atomic Habits, you have Charles Duhigg's The Power of Habit, that are really focused on the kind of science of habit formation. How do you view those books, those ideas competing versus complementing?
Yeah, I've never thought of them, and I've read several of them. I've never thought of them as competing, but I do think when they can be complementary is when you start with the principle. I mean, there's a reason that 35, 36 years later, 7 Habits is still one of the best-selling business books of all time, and it's because it is principle-based. In fact, I was doing a keynote down in Georgia several months ago, and we were setting up the hotel room or the conference room, and a woman that worked there, her name was Sylvia, that worked for the hotel. She came over to me, one of my colleagues, and said, "Now you're with FranklinCovey?" I said, "Yes." And she said, "I'll be right back." And she was all excited and ran out of the room. And I thought, did we not pay our bill the last time we were here? What's going on? Came back, and I have this image of it. I wish I could show it to you here. She was proudly holding up her 7 Habits of Highly Effective People in Spanish that her adult kids had given to her many years ago. And she went on, between her broken English and my broken Spanish, we were able to communicate. And she just talked about how this book had helped her put herself and her kids through school, single mom. And she went on about all of these things that she had accomplished. And we had this really rich discussion. And the reason I'm sharing that is because these principles are timeless. And when they're put into action through how we prescribe it here, but also how the books that you're referencing and the authors that you're referencing, if we can put that practicality into place based on the principle, it's powerful beyond belief. It's really powerful. So I don't see them competing, but I do see not necessarily those that you mentioned, but I have seen other. I don't want to say gimmicky, but things that when there's no why behind the what, when there's no principle foundation, they're pretty short-lived.
You mentioned there about working with a client, and I think FranklinCovey obviously has this incredible corpus of great content, 7 Habits, Speeding of Trust, et cetera. But we really work mostly with enterprises, not just with individuals. And so, could you share, in your experience working with companies, what are some of the most common problems that 7 Habits is used to solve within an organization? It's 7 Habits of Highly Effective Individuals, but we're rolling it out to thousands of people at a time to create an effective organization. So what problems does 7 Habits solve for a company?
Yeah, it's a great question. And like you said, we have an array of solutions that we use, but I would say that the principles, and there are many incorporated in the 7 Habits, they are pretty foundational for all of our solutions, leading at the speed of trust and the multipliers content. In fact, I just got back this morning from Washington, D.C., working with a client there. And you just got me thinking about this because they had a similar problem. Not all organizations, but their executive team are really struggling with silos in their organization. They're a global company, and good people, good leaders don't wake up in the morning and say, "Oh, I'm going to create this silo. I'm not going to share information with anybody else." But because we all get so feel so responsible for our area of the business, we unintentionally create these silos and the lack of communication. So I'm thinking of the last couple of work sessions that I did for large organizations. That was one of the common denominators. It was the communication or thereof and the silos that they go into. And so just starting out, first of all, being aware. I mean, 7 Habits is the course for self-awareness. I've experienced it myself and with all those I've worked with. So just that self-awareness and then pausing and thinking about how a decision I'm making is going to impact other parts of the organization. And with this particular organization that I was with in DC, it was a lot of habit 5, seek first to understand, and just listening and the whole communication and the importance of that. And again, these are basic foundational concepts, but says easy and does hard. And unless we determine specifically how am I going to model this better and how am I going to start implementing this better, then we just talk about them. We don't ever do anything with them.
I think it's so true that these are timeless principles, that this is foundational information that everybody needs to live a more effective life. I was actually on a call earlier today with a leader at a big AI technology company, and they looked over to their bookshelf and they had 7 Habits of Highly Effective People on their bookshelf. And it was this interesting moment of, they're at the cutting edge of frontier research and innovation, and 7 Habits is also their own personal operating system, they were saying. And, they read it 20 years ago, and they're still revisiting these themes and principles and paradigms and how they lead themselves and how they partner with their team.
Yeah. I hear similar comments all the time. I'm so fortunate to be a sharer of this information.
One of the concepts of Franklin of 7 Habits that I think is really powerful, but maybe is not as well known to people who just are more kind of casual fans or read it 20 years ago, they might not remember it, is about private victory preceding public victory. And I think that's particularly relevant for leaders right now as they are thinking about the public victory of their teams and their plans for the year ahead. So maybe explain, what does private victory precedes public victory mean? And why is it a particularly important concept as people are doing their annual planning?
Yeah, great question. So for those who are familiar, hopefully most people are familiar with 7 Habits, but whether you need a refresher or not, the 7 Habits are illustrated in what Dr. Covey calls the maturity continuum. And we grow in our maturity to hopefully interdependence, where we work well with others, through the 7 Habits. And the first 3 habits, be proactive, begin with the end in mind, and put first things first, we call those the private victory, because when we start to model and implement those habits in our own lives, we become trustworthy. It's those people that you and I work with that they do what they say they're going to do. They always follow through. They know where they're headed in life, and so it's private victory because it's victory with yourself, and it's what moves us from dependence to becoming independent. Before I read the 7 Habits, 32 years ago now, I thought becoming independent was the whole goal in life. You want to become a contributing, independent member of society. If you have children, you want to raise them to become independent, and it's a worthy goal. But if we stop there, we miss out on this, what you refer to, the public victory, that the habits 4, 5, and 6 that move us from independence to interdependence. Interdependence, where we have this mindset or this paradigm of we. Together, we can do so much more than, I can do on my own or you can do on your own. And so this public victory is where we build trust with others. So to your question, if I'm not trustworthy, I'm going to have a heck of a time trying to build trust with others. In fact, I remember, this is many years ago, but I was learning how to slalom ski, to water ski. And a gentleman named Tom, I'll call him Tom because that was his name, he was in the boat, and I had watched him try and get up on one ski. This is years ago. I can do it now. But and he struggled and never got up. But then when he was in the boat and it was my turn, we were with a group of friends, he was giving me all this coaching and telling me, no, you got to sit back more. No, you got to do this. And in my mind, I kept thinking, well, you were never able to do this. Why am I even listening to you? And so, simple example, but it's why we've got to be not perfect. No one's perfect, but we got to be a pretty good model of the private victory, habits 1, 2, and 3, before we can ever start influencing others.
Stop being busy and start being effective. FranklinCovey's guide, Manage Your Time Like a Pro, gives you 7 actionable steps to stay focused and energized to achieve what matters most. Grab your free copy from the show notes to plan your week with clarity and intention. So you mentioned earlier about the course. So there's obviously 7 Habits, this best-selling book. There's also a 7 Habits solution that FranklinCovey has developed and spent over decades now, tens of millions of dollars developing the solution. Last year, FranklinCovey released the most updated version, 7 Habits 5.0. You have worked with many companies deploying the 7 Habits 5.0 across their organization. What are the big changes from 4.0 to 5.0? What makes 5.0 special or particularly impactful?
Love that question. I love the new version. So there are still 7 habits. The principles are still the principles because that's what makes it so timeless, is that principles don't change. And the things that Dr. Covey wrote about were, true 1,000 years ago, and they'll be true 1,000 years from now. But the application of those habits is what have been updated. And so just the challenges that you and I and other leaders in organizations deal with today and in our personal lives have changed. And so the relevant examples, some of the activities, the real discussions, the actual discussions that we're having are about today's issues. How do I manage these remote employees that some I've never met? We hired them virtually and they've worked virtually, and how do I have an influence with them? And how do I really connect with someone and listen with empathy over Zoom or over the phone? So the technology has changed. The application of these habits has changed. The habits themselves nor the principles behind them have not changed, but the way we apply them so that our clients around the world can say, oh, wow, this is what we need today in our workforce.
I love that idea that the principles have stayed the same over the course of 40 years. The application of them evolves to match the kind of current context in the current world of work.
Exactly.
Could you maybe share a favorite story over the years of bringing 7 Habits to a company? It could be something recent, the 7 Habits 5.0, but you talked a bit earlier about companies using 7 Habits to break down silos. Is there a company that really stands out in your mind about how thoroughly they've embraced this and how it's transformed their organization?
Yeah. Wish I had time to share several of them, but just thinking about one actually that I worked with recently, but this has come up a lot. So it did have to do with silos, but more, not specifically silos, but just communication. And I think, in fact, even at FranklinCovey here, every culture survey we've done, if it's not the top of the list, it's near the top, is communication. That employees and associates feel like we XYZ company could always do better at communication. And so the company that I'm thinking of is a company back in New York. They have this problem. Now, when I say they have this, they've made huge headway, but we got to keep the focus on it. And so we talked a lot about that up front before we went in, and then they rolled out 7 Habits, starting with your executive team and then with several layers down of leadership. And this Habit 5, again, we just did a blow up of Habit 5. In fact, we took almost a whole day on Habit 5 and then some other days on the other habits. But just the art of listening and communicating and balancing courage and consideration in all of your communication. And we developed on the spot, we customized just some exercises that they were each going to do. And so they have these leadership huddles. They were already having a leadership meeting every week, but they had these leadership huddles and still have them specifically around communication. And they make commitments to each other every week. This executive team does about how am I going to, and everything else I'm doing, how am I going to model communication, just listening with empathy, not listening with the intent to reply, but listening with the intent to understand. And how am I going to make sure that I am not unintentionally creating a silo by not sharing information to the teams that I interact with. And then they report out on that every week. It's just 5 or 10 minutes of their weekly team meeting anyway. And when I was just talking to the CEO about what's been 2 weeks ago now, they were just sharing with me the significant progress they've made and the feedback they've had from their employees, at the I don't want to say lower ranks, but spread out, that the information is flowing much more smoothly. And it takes an intentional focus and it takes time, but the payoff has been significant for them.
We've been focusing a lot on 7 Habits in this conversation today, really because it is such a great book to either revisit if you've already read it before as you're thinking about your intentions for the year, or if you haven't read it, to pick it up now and to focus on it, potentially bring it to your team, to your organization. It really is the foundation of so much of what we do at FranklinCovey. So thanks for indulging my questions about the 7 Habits. Now I want to move on to some of your own work. So you wrote a book as well. You've written multiple books, but one of your books, Get Better, was all about relationships. What motivated you to write the book?
Yeah, thanks for letting me talk about me. So, Get Better, 15 proven practices to build effective relationships at work. Our publisher, the publisher of 7 Habits as well, but one of the main publishers for FranklinCovey, Simon & Schuster, we got into this discussion about how impactful would it be to have the chief people officer of the people company, FranklinCovey, write a book on relationships. I view nothing more important than relationships. At the end of the day, professional, personal, it's how we get things done. It's how we influence, it's how we live. If you or I right now during this discussion, if we had someone important to us, professional or personal, that had an emergency, we would stop what we're doing right now and we'd go, I mean, at the end of the day, relationships are where it's at. And so it started with a discussion like that. And because I had been in the chief people officer role for 18 years, had a lot of time in that role, I will say this humbly, that I had a lot of experience in dealing with, relationships that I formed, but also coaching our leaders and others on how to improve those relationships. And people might hear, well, relationships, that's nice, but I got a business to run. Well, unless you're in a company and you're all by yourself, we get results with and through others. And so relationships are the key. Effective relationships with high trust, relationships where we're always thinking win-win, habit 4. And so that was the impetus for this book, and it was certainly difficult and very rewarding to write and to now speak about.
So the book has been out for 8 years. I'm curious what lesson from the book you have found resonates the most with the most audiences.
Well, the principles that I talk about in the book, I didn't invent, nor did Stephen Covey invent any of the principles. So I pulled principles from the work we do at FranklinCovey. And I would say, without going into all of the 15 practices, wearing glasses that work, practice number 1. It's all about paradigms and the way we see things and how the way we see things influences everything we do. That certainly resonates. One that resonates with leaders, senior and more junior, is make it safe to tell the truth. It's practice number 13, do you make it safe for others to tell you the truth? I mean, the book is called Get Better. And how am I ever supposed to get better if I don't know where my blind spots are, or where at least you think my blind spots are? Maybe I know what my blind spots are, but I hope nobody else sees them, but they do. And so if I make it safe for others to tell me the truth, and I see feedback as a gift. In fact, I was giving a keynote on feedback at 2 a.m. the other day because it was a group over in Asia. But one of the participants said, do you know that in Mandarin, the literal translation of feedback is to give a gift? She actually said to take a gift back. And I said, well, that's not a good thing. But then she said, to give a gift back and forth. And I loved her explanation of that. And I'm pretty sure I have it right. I think she said it was in Mandarin. And if we can see feedback as this gift for us to receive and for us to give others, we're all in this spirit of helping each other get better. In fact, Will, without going into detail, I remember some feedback you gave me that was wildly helpful for me in my role as Chief People Officer. And so, yeah, and so it just helps us all get better. So if we see feedback as this gift of helping us grow our teams and our organizations, there's no stopping what that company can do. So anyway, I got off on a tangent there, but that's another practice that leaders around the world that I've worked with have really resonated with.
You wrote the book, you published the book before 2 tectonic shifts in work. The first being COVID, pandemic, the move to remote work, hybrid work, the second being the rise of AI. If you got the option to rewrite the book now, knowing how the world of work has changed, what, if anything, would you change to it?
Well, I don't want to say I wouldn't change anything, because obviously it can improve upon anything, but that's a great question.
It could be the principles are timeless as well, and so work is work.
Yeah,
is work.
yeah, and thanks for letting me off the hook there. But no, I wouldn't change any of the. We started out with 21. It's 15 proven practices. We started out with 21. We said, okay, even 15 is a lot. We narrowed it down to 15. I think while I would change it now, I would just, the examples that are in the book, it's 8 years old, 9 years old when we wrote it, just like we've done with 7 Habits, there would be more examples of today's workforce. But I think the way that it's written, and because I had a lot of help too, it's written that everything in there, the principles are certainly still applicable, but even the scenarios that I use, they were all, the names were changed to protect the innocent, but all of the examples in there are real. So I think, yeah, just updating on maybe some of the challenges we deal with today that we didn't have 8 years ago.
So working at FranklinCovey for as many years as you have, you've had a front row seat to leadership and leadership evolution over time. How do leaders lead differently today than maybe 20 years ago? What are some of the essentials of successful modern leadership?
Yeah. 30 years I've been here. I'm in my 30th year, and
wow, congratulations.
Thank you. I love it. It's flown by, and I feel just so lucky to have been here. I think the leaders of today, I don't know that this was ever successful, but what is not successful today is the autocratic or the hierarchical, I always almost choke when I say that word, top-down approach. I don't know that it ever worked, but it was certainly more acceptable 30 years ago when I started at FranklinCovey. Now, I don't know that we ever really had it here at FranklinCovey, but I worked with clients who had it. And people more and more, I think people were always built this way, but more and more they are less willing to work in an organization where they don't feel and aren't recognized for the value they're adding. Everybody wants to contribute. Everybody wants to do some meaningful work. And while that's probably always been the case, people are, in a good way, are much more outspoken about it now. And so if I'm not a leader that recognizes that recognizes what we call the whole person paradigm and value that person as a whole person and the contribution they want to make, then I'm going to have less than stellar talent in my organization, because there are many opportunities, even in tough job markets. There are plenty of opportunities for people to go out where they feel like they are really contributing and seen as value. It doesn't mean, we just got to praise people, we can never give them feedback. In fact, let them know you are interested in their growth and you value their contributions. So that's what I have seen more and more over my 30 years here, is that the best leaders are those people who recognize, as our mission statement says, the greatness that lies within everyone.
Do you think that the generational changes in the workforce are overhyped or underhyped on the impact on leaders? Like, is it that different managing millennial versus Gen Z versus Gen Alpha, or?
Yeah, I have not written a book on that. And while I want to make sure I'm not an expert on that, but I will tell you my experience, they're not that different. They're overhyped in my and no offense to anybody who feels otherwise, but I've worked with for so many years, and even most recently, I've been in this full-time consultant role now for 3 years since I stepped down from the chief people officer role, and I've worked with multiple generations and organizations that have multiple generations within them. And it's like principles. At the end of the day, we're all human beings. We all want to be liked. We all want to add value. We all want to be recognized. If we're mature, we also want to have feedback to know how we can get better. And that doesn't change whether I'm 20 or 30 or 50 or 60.
Absolutely. So as we move towards closing here, I want to ask you a few personal questions in our lightning round. So we just finished the holiday break. And I would love to know, you have a big family. I think you have 12, you are about to have 12 grandchildren. So you have 11 now. What is your favorite family holiday ritual?
Well, I love that you're asking me this. Have I got 20 minutes here? No. Favorite ritual. Years ago, I have 4 children and they're adults now, but when they were young, my wife and I came home from shopping and they were in an argument. And we were upset because here we had been out, helping Santa Claus purchase his gifts. And so we sat them down. We said, okay, the 4 of you are going to write letters to each other and tell each other what you love about each other. And so they did that. And they also, without us asking, they also wrote a letter to me and my wife about what they loved about us. Well, that started out of this angry situation. It was a couple weeks before Christmas. We started this tradition that we've carried on for 35 years now. And we write letters before Christmas. And then before we open up gifts on Christmas morning, we'll spend an hour and a half and everybody's reading each other these letters. And honestly, we finished that, Will, and it's like the gifts are fine, but we've already had this really fulfilling experience on Christmas morning. And one year I had them all put in books for everybody. I had copies of all the letters that people had written to each other. So probably more information than you wanted to hear, but that's been
No, I love
that's
that.
been a
I,
favorite
I love that
of ours.
tradition. And then when you're done opening gifts and you're done with your big meal and you're ready to retire to the TV for a movie, holiday movie, what is your favorite holiday movie?
Oh, that one's easy. It's a Wonderful Life. In fact, I just watched it on the plane. It was on Delta flying home from DC. It's a Wonderful Life. I could
Lovely.
watch it. I have watched it hundreds of times. My favorite.
Awesome. And then a final holiday related question. Is there a holiday food that you that is a guilty pleasure that you are now going to be having to have your New Year's resolution of burning off?
Well, I have worked really hard. We didn't talk about sharpen the saw, habit 7, but that is, investing in yourself physically, mentally, social, emotionally, and spiritually. Physically, I've worked really hard to slim down, so I'm going to be very careful this holiday season. But my wife makes fudge like no other, and we do that for our neighbors and friends. And I don't like a lot of nuts in things, but for some reason, when it's the nuts in the fudge that she makes, that's one of my guilty pleasures.
That's it. Okay, great. All right, so our final closing question we asked to everybody, FranklinCovey's a leadership company. Who is a leader who you have worked closely with over the course of your career, who you really admire, and who you learned a lot from?
Wow. Well, I don't want to name drop here, but I had several years with Dr. Covey before he passed away. And that was, I will forever be grateful for that. In fact, some of his family that still works at the company, that I remind them often or tell them often how much I appreciate the opportunity I had of working with their dad. Someone else
Is there a story? I'm actually curious. It's rare that you get to talk to somebody who worked with Dr. Covey directly. So is there a story that you feel like kind of gives a little window into what that experience was like?
Yes, and I want to be respectful, and I also don't want to sound like, oh yeah, we were best buddies. I mean, we I had the opportunity to work with him, have some personal conversations with him, and so those were just inspired. I think the thing I think about most was someone who, again, and he himself would say, never perfected himself in any of the habits, but what I saw of him and experienced of him is someone who really walked the talk. Over and over again, and a specific experience. I remember when we were making a video of him. I used to work in our innovations department, and we asked him during one of the film breaks, Dr. Covey, if you could remember only one thing from the 7 habits that would make you more effective, what would it be? And I remember him joking with us, oh, you have to do them all. But then we pushed him on it. And in fact, we talk about this in the course now, and he said, and I've already referred to it, he said it would be this: plan each week before the week begins. And it's probably why I have been as successful as I've been. I still, I'm not perfect, but why that has taken on such meaning for me, because it was so true. I wasn't a great weekly planner back then. This was 20 some odd years ago, but I have really deliberately invested in that, and it's made all the difference in the world. And his whole point was just that, yeah, do it for your life, but do it on a regular weekly basis. Where am I going? Where am I going to go this week? Okay, so that I don't get to the end of the month or the year and say, oh crap, I was going to spend time with this person, or I was going to develop this skill or whatever. So that's one. One other leader that I've had good fortune, thanks to FranklinCovey, working somewhat closely with is Seth Godin, the best-selling author Seth Godin, and I was able to do a webinar with him just a couple of months ago, and have had some personal interactions with him, and I've learned from him. Very high integrity, authentic individual.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today and for sharing the insights from the 7 habits, the insights from your own work, the insights of working with clients, with individuals, with teams, bring us to life, transforming how they approach their work and approach their lives. So really appreciate the time today.
Thank you, Will. I really appreciate being invited to do this.
Absolutely. So for everybody listening out there, Happy New Year. We hope that you pick up the 7 habits. We hope that you revisit it if you already have it. We hope that it helps guide you in your resolutions and creates the most meaningful, fulfilling year for you possible. So have a wonderful start to your year, and hope to see you again next week on FranklinCovey on Leadership.